Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we are going to study the book of Esther, chapter 4, as we continue our study of the book of Esther. That's Megillat Esther, Perek Daled. In the last chapter 3, there's several points I need to remind us of so that we can understand properly chapter 4. First of all, of course, the unfortunate and terrible decree that was of genocide against the Jews that was to take place on the upcoming 13th day of Adar, last month of the year. And this decree had now been spread throughout the entire kingdom, and the Jews, unfortunately, had to deal with this awful possibility of murder and genocide. I also want to remind you of a couple of pointers that are somewhat different than what you may remember from your studies as a child or throughout the years that I had pointed out when we studied this chapter. And one of them was the main one was the way I understood the interaction between Mordechai and the court and Haman when Mordechai refused to bow. And I want to go back now to chapter 3 to remind us of chapter 3, verse 4. That was Vayihi ki amram elav yom yom, when the people of the court kept on saying to Mordechai on a daily basis, why don't you bow? Why are you disobeying the king's order? Why do you not bow to Haman? V'lo shama aleim, he refused to listen to them. And then Vayagidu Haman, the people told Haman, Lirot amdu divrei Mordechai, to see if the words of Mordechai would be fulfilled. In other words, and the way I understood this, and I described it in detail last time, so please, if you haven't, let's go ahead and listen to chapter 3, was that there was a debate. Mordechai's reason for not bowing down was because Mordechai did not believe that there was a decree from the king that everyone should bow down to Haman. And the hint to that was in the words at verse 2, the king only told Haman supposedly about this decree. So Mordechai, by stating that he was a Jew, is stating that I am therefore being loyal to the king, which is consistent with Mordechai's reporting the two conspirators, Bigsan and Viserys, to the king, because he was loyal to the king. So this Hayamdu Divrei Mordechai is a classic court intrigue where the people are looking to see, is Haman going to gain and keep the influence with the king that Haman claims he has, and therefore everyone should bow down to him? Or is Mordechai's words going to hold, and is Haman going to have an eventual downfall? Now, you and I, because we know the end of the story, know that eventually Mordechai's loyalty to the king and Haman's lack of loyalty to the king is what led to the downfall of Haman. So Mordechai's words did work. However, at this point in the game, it certainly seems as if Mordechai's strategy has failed and Haman's strategy has won. Another thing that's really important that I want to mention, that also it's going to be very important to understand chapter 4, is that Haman, when he went to the king and said that we need to get rid of the Jews in the empire, he did not say that it was because Mordechai did not bow down. It's very important to note this. I think it's a huge misconception that we think it was Mordechai's not bowing down is what made Haman angry and what made Haman want to destroy the Jews. However, when Haman presented it to the king, what he presented was that the Jews are not loyal because they have their own language, they're scattered, they keep their own rules, etc. So this is an important point, and I want you to bear this and keep this in mind as we study chapter 4, because this will answer a lot of questions that are latent as we study chapter 4. The first verse of chapter 4 reads as follows. Esther 4:1. Mordechai yada et kol asher naasa. And Mordechai knew everything that had happened, everything that had occurred. This phrase in and of itself is the commentaries jump on this phrase. What do you mean Mordechai knew everything that was done? Presumably this refers to the decree against the Jews. Of course he knew. The entire kingdom knew. We just announced that it was posted in all of the town squares. It was announced throughout the entire kingdom. There was runners throughout the kingdom. The entire city was dumbfounded, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We just described in intricate detail how popularized this no, this terrible decree was. So what does it mean Mordechai knew? Like he had some kind of access to some information that others people didn't know. So I'm going to suggest that yes, Mordechai knew some things that other people did not know. Mordechai knew and understood the intrigue that led up to this decree. Other people thought Mordechai was a loyal courtier who stood up for his loyalty to the king, and Haman and other people did not know that it was this this intrigue between Mordechai and Haman in the king's court that led to this decree. People in general had no idea. They thought that Mordechai was still a powerful and influential person in the court of the king, especially because he had given up Bigson Viserys. And the fact that he stood up and refused to bow to Haman because he was loyal to the king, they may have known that. So the people did not know, but Mordechai knew and understood that it was Hayamdu Devrei Mordechai, that his words, his strategy, his loyalty was not helping him and seemed to have failed dramatically in the worst possible way. His loyalty led to the to Haman going to the king and gaining even more influence and then using that influence for such an awful outcome, which then explains Mordechai's actions. Rather than go to the court of the king and and this to figure out a way to try to do something about this decree, Mordechai didn't have any idea what to do. His entire strategy had fallen. So this explains the second part of this verse. Vayikra Mordechai et begadav. Mordechai went and tore his clothing. Vayilbash sakva ifer, and he dressed in sackcloth and ash. Vayetze b'tochayir, and he went out into the city. Vayizak ze'aka gedola umara, and he cried out with a terrible, great, and bitter cry. Why? Because some of the commentaries ask, well, why didn't Mordechai go to the court? Why didn't he try to strategize, call a meeting of his advisors, think what he can do? Well, that's because Mordechai has just had his entire strategy and all of his influence in the court just went kaput. It just went down. He now had no influence. He was just, his strategy had shown to have completely and utterly failed and backfired in his face. So Vayavoad Lefnei Shar Melech, he came, this is verse 2, until the gateways of the king, Ki Ein Levo Shar Melech Bilvushtak, because he cannot go even into the court with sackcloth. It would be disrespectful to go into the king's court with sackcloth. Mordechai actually acted in such a way that disabled him from going into the king's court and trying to influence things because he had been rejected and he had lost. Uvuchol Medina, Medina, this is verse 3, and in every one of the provinces, places where the word of the king and his laws have reached, as they reached those places farther and farther out into the reaches of the kingdom, Evel Gadola Yehudim, there was a tremendous mourning among the Jews that resided within those Medinot, within those provinces, Vitzom and fasting, Ubachi and crying, Umispade and lamentation, Sakva Efer Yutzal Arabim, everyone was gathered and lying in sackcloth and ash, mourning this terrible decree. So as we now we have this play, the leader, we have this understanding. The leader of the people, Mordechai, has no more access to the king's court because his credibility is completely lost. His strategy of loyal to the king has backfired. But so what does Mordechai do? This is the following, this is what happens next. Verse 4. So Esther's young women who were her assistants, and her eunuchs that were in charge of taking care of her, came by Agidula, and they told her that Mordechai was mourning and crying in sackcloth. Now, the general understanding is Vatischalchal Hamalka Miod, and the queen was terribly agitated and frightened and moved by this Mordechai's behavior. The common understanding of this is that Esther, being holed up in the castle in the king's palace, simply was not aware of this news. I would like to suggest that that is not at all what happened over here. One can imagine that maybe she had no idea, being in the queen's castle, not knowing what's going on in the public. But it's very hard to believe. She had access. She had these her sarisim, her eunuchs, her assistants, the na'arot, the girls that assisted her. She had contacts with the outside world. It would be unusual to imagine that she didn't know. I think that's one of the questions that the commentaries always deal with. But according to our understanding, it's actually very simple. What Esther is surprised about and so agitated about and so upset about is that she knew of the decree, and she was obviously upset, like any other Jew would be upset, horrifically upset about the decree. But what Esther did not know was the intrigue and the fact that Mordechai had lost his position, and the fact that this occurred because of the arguments of the competition between Mordechai and Haman, and the fact that Mordechai is now unable to do anything to save the people. So her first reaction is being afraid and agitated that her supporter, the one who is the leader of the Jewish people, Mordechai, now has nothing to do. He has no more influence. So vatischalchal amal, and the first thing she does is vatishlach begadim. She sends him clothing, lahalbishet Mordechai, so that Mordechai can get dressed. Ulhasir sakome alav, and to take the sackcloth off. Velo kibel, and he did not accept it. What many commentators ask, why is she sending him clothes? It's as if he doesn't have clothes. I'm sure she realizes that he has clothes. The point is she's telling him, no, I want you to be able to go into the king's court because I want you to have that influence. Because Esther at this point doesn't know, or why is it that Mordechai is giving up? Why is it that he is not trying to influence this process and taking on the mantle that a leader is supposed to? He's supposed to go into the king's court and do something. So the next verse then makes sense. Vatikra Esther lahatach. So Esther went and called Hatach, who was one Misarisei Hamelach, who was one of the eunuchs of the king, one of the assistants of the king, Asher Hamid Lifonah, that the king had placed before Esther to serve Esther, Vatitzaveu al Mordechai, and she commanded him regarding Mordechai, Ladas Mazeh Vi'al Mazeh, to understand what is this about and why is this true. In other words, if you're refusing to go into the king's court and do what I know you have always been doing until now, what is the story? What is happening? What is going on? So verse 6, Vayetze Hatach al Mordechai, Hatach went out to Mordechai al Rehova Ir, to the streets of the city. In other words, because he was not in the king's court. Asher lifnei Sha'ar Hamelech, the streets that were before, but outside the gateway to the king's palace. Vayagid lo Mordechai es kol asher karahu. And Mordechai told him everything that had happened to him. This is crucial. What do you mean? The commentaries all wonder. What do you mean? What happened to him? It's what's happening to the Jewish people. That's the issue. But no, the Jewish people, Esther already knows. Everyone already knows. What Mordechai is telling him is what happened to him. That I made a mistake. I was loyal to the king. I didn't bow to Haman. I thought that my loyalty to the king, especially in light of Bigton Viserys, would help maintain my influence. But no, instead, Haman's influence increased. And then he explained about the money that Haman offered to pay the king, which explains, in Mordechai's mind, that explains why is it that Haman was so successful, because he paid the king off. And once the king shows that he's willing to dispose of an entire people and commit genocide because of money, then my influence is gone. My loyalty is meaningless. What is my loyalty worth when Haman can outpay me and out-influence me in such corrupt ways by Yudim La'abdam, that he put that the money that he offered to destroy the Jews? And then he showed him the Patshegin Ksav Hadas. He showed him the actual language, the written text of the law, Asher Nitan b'Shushan. So Mordechai showed him that was the law that had been put out in Shushan, Lashmidam, to destroy the Jews. Natan lo laharot Esther, he gave it to him to show Esther, lahagid lo, and to tell her. There's several points in this verse here which the commentaries discuss. One is, why does he have to show her? What's the point of saying the text of the written text? According to what we have been explaining, this is very important, because the written text does not say anything about about the bowing down and the lack of bowing down and so on. That it was, the episode. What it shows though is that Haman used his influence with the king simply by influencing the king, because Haman and because Haman's tactics and strategies ended up winning over the tactics and strategies of Mordechai. When Mordechai says, when loyalty doesn't work, we're lost. We have nothing, and therefore, when we're up against corruption and bribery, we're lost. And this is the message that Mordechai wanted to convey to Esther, and that's why the actual text of the document was so important. And then it repeats again, Laharot Esther, to show her, Ula Hagid La, and to tell her. So what does it mean? And to tell her what? So I noticed the Ralbag mentions, and to tell her that it was Mordechai's not bowing down that caused the whole thing. I want to add to what the Ralbag's explanation and say that it was Mordechai's attempt at loyalty that failed. It was Mordecai's strategy of being a loyal, honest person that failed. Dishonesty, lies, that's what's winning, whereas honesty and loyalty is losing the game at this point. And therefore, therefore Mordecai now had no longer any ability to go to the king's court. So now he wants to command Esther to go to the king to appeal to him and to plead in front of him al amma over her nation. So Vayavo Hatach Vayagid Esther Esther Mordechai. So Hatach came and told Esther all of the words of Mordechai. So now Esther knows not only is there a decree against the people, but she also knows that Haman has paid off the king and that his corruption has led to his rise in influence. And she also knows that Mordechai's loyalty and Mordechai's honesty has failed and he has no influence. So she cannot depend on him anymore. So Vatomer Esther la Hatach, the first answer of Esther in verse 10, she says to Hatach, Vatitzaveh al Mordechai, and commanded him to bring the following message to Mordechai. Kol avdei hamelach, all the servants of the king, Bi'am medinot hamelach, and all of the nations of all of the provinces of the king, Yodim, they all know, Asher kol ish v'isha, that any man or woman, Asher yavo el hamelach, that comes to the king, el hachotzer hapnimis, into the inner courtyard, Asher lo yikareh, if he or she has not been called in, achas tasol hamis. There's just one rule: they will die. Finished. That's it. If you walk into the king's inner chambers to plead whatever cause it is that you want to, it doesn't matter if you were not called in and you were not asked to come, you will be put to death. Unless the king puts out his scepter and welcomes the person in, his golden scepter, then that person might live. However, Esther says, I haven't been called into the king for 30 days. So apparently, I'm putting my life at risk if I go in to see the king. And you should know this, Esther says. Mordechai at the very Esther, verse 12. So they told Mordechai what Esther's response was. And then Mordechai answers one of the most famous answers in the entire Bible. Vayomer Mordechai 13, and this is something speaks to us in all of our lives. Vayomer Mordechai lo hashiva el Esther, and Mordechai said that this should be the answer that you should give to Esther. This is because they're speaking through a middleman. Remember, Mordechai is out in the street. Al tidami b'nafshech. Don't imagine and don't think that your life, Lihimalate, will be saved. Beit HaMelech, in the house of the king, Mikol Ayudim, from all the Jewish people. Don't think that just because you seem to be in a secure position, that you'll be okay when all the rest of your people are being put to death. If you are silent in this time, you are the one person that has the position and possibility to do something. And if you don't step up to the plate and do something, the Jewish people will be saved. Some relief and deliverance will come from some other place. God will figure out a way to do it. But He's giving you the opportunity to do this now. And if you don't step up to the plate, you and your family will end up being lost. And who knows God's plans? We don't know God's plans, but who knows in Leit Kazos if it was for this specific time He got Lamalchut that you were put in this position. This is something that we all find ourselves many times in our lives in the position to do something. God puts us in a position to help another person, to help other people, to do something good, to step up to the plate and do something. Now, we don't know God's plans, just like Mordechai said. We don't understand fully why God does what he does and why we're in the positions that we're in. But we do know that when that opportunity comes, if we don't step up to the plate and do it, God's world will move along, but we will have missed the opportunity to do what we were meant to do. And then we will end up falling into the large abyss full of people who missed opportunities. Atomer Esther la Shiva Mordechai. Esther got the message, and she said, after she heard Mordechai's answer, she said, "Okay, I'm going to do what I need to do, and this should be your answer to Mordechai. Lech, I need help. I will do what I need to do, but I need help. So we need to pray. Lech kenosas kol hayudim, gather all of the Jewish people on in Shushan that are found in the city of Shushan. V'tzumu alai, and let them fast for me. V'al tochlu, and they should not eat. V'al tishtu, and should not drink. Shloshet yamim laila v'yom, for 3 days, day and night. Gamani v'narotai atzum kain, and I and my girls that are with me, atzum kain, we will also fast in the same way. Uvachein, and in this way, then Avo al Melech, I will come to the king Asher lo kados, which is against the law. Kasher avadati avadati, and if God decides that me doing this means that I'm going to die, then I will die. So pray for me. All the people should pray for me, so that hopefully God will hear our prayers and I will walk in and out in peace and save the people. Vayavon Mordechai. So Mordechai left the place where he was standing near the gate. Vayas, and he did kechol asher tzivto of Esther, and he did just as Esther had asked him to do. He went to the city of people of the Jews of the city of Shushan and asked them to all involve themselves in 3 days of fasting and prayer. Thank you so much for studying Esther chapter 4 together. Looking forward to studying Esther 5 and, of course, the entire book of Esther together.